Oh, there he goes.
After debunking decades of Sasquatch claims, David Paulides finally reveals the most convincing Bigfoot footage ever. Frame by frame, he found himself confronting evidence so impossible that it would force authorities to expose what they've been hiding. David's investigation began in Northern California, in areas where Bigfoot sightings had been reported for generations. Rather than chasing fresh reports or setting up cameras hoping to capture footage, the approach was methodical. Interview witnesses, gather physical evidence, look for patterns, apply the same investigative techniques used in criminal cases to a mystery that had frustrated researchers for decades. Could the truth be found not in proving existence, but in understanding nature? What emerged from thousands of interviews and field investigations was a picture far more complex than anyone anticipated. The physical evidence was there, plenty of it, but alongside all that tangible proof were reports of phenomena that didn't fit any known biological model. Creatures that seemed to vanish in open terrain, encounters accompanied by strange lights and unexplainable sensations, behavior that suggested intelligence far beyond what an undiscovered primate should possess. Footprints discovered across North America, from California to Washington, from Minnesota to Oklahoma, show consistent anatomical features that appear in casts taken by different people in different decades. These aren't crude impressions that could be carved out of wood and stamped in mud. They show dermal ridges, the equivalent of fingerprints on the soles of feet. They demonstrate a mid-tarsal break, a flexibility in the middle of the foot that humans don't possess, but that would be biomechanically advantageous for a heavy creature moving through rough terrain. Forensic podiatrists who've examined these casts can't explain them away as hoaxes. The complexity is simply too great, creating fake dermal ridges that follow anatomically correct patterns that appear slightly different in each print, the way real fingerprints vary, that show pressure variations consistent with weight distribution during walking. That level of sophisticated forgery would be nearly impossible. And for what purpose? Most of these prints are found in remote locations where no one would see them unless specifically searching. Paul Freeman, a ranger working in the middle of nowhere by himself, stumbled across unusual tracks that started and stopped sometimes in the middle of nowhere. He carried his camera around, hoping to catch something, though he wasn't even sure what. And this is where one of the most famous footage was caught, when he finally captured video evidence of a Bigfoot-like creature, complete with a child being picked up at the end. The world dismissed it. Yet the footage came from an era before digitalization, when such manipulation was effectively impossible. Freeman wasn't a wealthy man. He couldn't have hoaxed it. How could such evidence simply be ignored? Aside from visuals, the vocalizations are equally compelling. Audio recordings from the Sierra Nevada mountains, captured in the 1970s by Ron Moorhead and his companions, have been analyzed by sound engineers and linguistics experts. These recordings, known as the Sierra sounds, aren't recordings of known animals. They're not humans attempting to hoax. The frequency ranges exceed what human vocal cords can produce. The patterns show structure that suggests language, actual communication with grammar and meaning. Then there's the physical evidence of strength. Massive trees found broken or twisted at heights 10 to 15 feet off the ground in ways that don't match wind or ice damage. Boulders moved that would require multiple people or machinery. Structures built from logs that would take teams of men to manipulate. Whatever is creating these effects possesses strength far beyond human capability. Could this be dismissed as natural phenomena? Here's where things become complicated. For every piece of solid, measurable evidence, there's a report that makes no biological sense. And these aren't rare anomalies that can be dismissed as mistakes or misidentifications. They're consistent patterns that appear again and again in witness testimony from credible observers who have nothing to gain from fabricating stories. According to Paulides, park rangers, people who work in the wilderness every day, who understand sightlines and terrain, who know what animals can and can't do, describe encounters where massive creatures vanish between trees in terrain where there's nowhere to hide. The being is visible one moment, impossible to miss given its size, and simply gone the next. Not running away, not ducking behind cover, just no longer there. These are trained observers reporting something that shouldn't be possible. Barb Choupet's footage captured in her own backyard showed similar impossibilities. She heard something walking on the gravel and noticed her dogs crying under the porch. What caught her attention next defied explanation. She could hear the screen door open, saw the doorknob turning. What she was looking at was covered entirely in hair. The smell was overwhelming, like a dead animal. When investigators examined the area, they found a 17-inch track in the creek bed nearby, right where she'd indicated. The footage she captured matched patterns seen in Scott Carpenter's research, validating one account with another. But what was most disturbing wasn't what was captured on film, but what happened after. The sense that these beings choose when to appear and when to vanish. Now it's easy to dismiss footage as hoax, but what if researchers chimed in with their DNA expertise? Over the course of several years, David Paulides and his team collected samples alleged to be from these creatures for genetic testing. Hair that didn't match known species, biological material from sites where encounters occurred, anything that might provide definitive proof of what these beings actually are. Finding a laboratory willing to test the samples proved nearly impossible. UC Davis, UC Berkeley, all the major labs refused to touch it when they discovered it was Bigfoot related. The only person willing to conduct the analysis was Dr. Melba Ketchum, a geneticist who had testified in Texas courts and put people on death row based on her DNA testimony. When people questioned her expertise, Paulides had a simple challenge: find a bigger expert who can testify in court. They wouldn't find one. When the DNA analysis came back, it showed something nobody expected. The mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited only from the mother, came back completely human. Not similar to human, not close to human, but identical to modern human mitochondrial DNA. Genetic markers suggested this maternal lineage originated in the Middle East approximately 12 to 15,000 years ago, the same genetic heritage that can be traced in human populations today. But the nuclear DNA, which is inherited from both parents, told a different story. The sequences didn't match anything in genetic databases. Not human, not any known primate, not any cataloged species. The analysis suggested the presence of DNA from an unknown source, something that should theoretically be impossible. Every creature on Earth has ancestors. Every species has evolutionary relatives. Finding DNA that doesn't match any known organism in 34 trillion base pairs in GenBank raises profound questions. Mainstream geneticists argued contamination, suggesting that human DNA got mixed into samples during collection or testing. They pointed to methodological concerns and the fact that the study wasn't published in major peer-reviewed journals. For many scientists, the results were interesting but ultimately inconclusive, more likely to reflect problems with the testing process than evidence of an unknown species. But Paulides interpreted the data differently. If the maternal line is human, but the paternal line is something unknown, what does that imply? The hypothesis suggested that these creatures might represent a hybrid, the result of an unknown hominid species interbreeding with humans thousands of years ago. It would explain their human-like appearance, their obvious intelligence, and their ability to remain hidden despite being so large and apparently widespread. Critics claimed the DNA was contaminated, but Paulides had a simple response to this argument. Let's pretend contamination occurred in the worst possible way. Let's pretend someone grabbed the hair sample, rolled it between their hands, rubbed it on their face, and contaminated it thoroughly. The lab would still cleanse it, and even if contamination remained, what would the testing reveal? On the maternal side, you'd find the contaminator's mother's DNA. On the fraternal side, you'd find the contaminator's father's DNA. To find nothing on the fraternal side, to find DNA that matches nothing in any database, is literally impossible through contamination. That's never happened before. When researcher L.A. Marzulli studied elongated skulls in South America and conducted DNA testing, he encountered the same phenomenon, unknown nuclear DNA. He knew it. He had been saying from day one that when nuclear DNA was found, there'd be nothing in the GenBank to match it. The maternal DNA traced to the Middle East raised even more eyebrows, particularly among those familiar with religious texts. Could these beings somehow be connected to ancient accounts? Could they be what old texts referred to as the Nephilim, the giants that once walked the earth? Scott Carpenter, a researcher who worked closely with Paulides, believed they were. He called them the beasts of the earth, referenced in ancient traditions, and the DNA evidence seemed to support historical accounts of giants whose bones were supposedly collected by museums like the Smithsonian, bones that today the Smithsonian claims never existed. This presents a fundamental challenge to the ape hypothesis. Gorillas are intelligent. Chimpanzees use tools and have complex social structures. Orangutans demonstrate problem-solving abilities that rival human children, but no ape developed spoken language in the wild. The cognitive architecture required for language, the specific neural pathways and brain structures, evolved in humans and our direct ancestors. If these creatures possess genuine language, they're not just unusually smart animals. They're something fundamentally different from any known primate. The behavior demonstrates strategic intelligence applied to avoiding detection. These beings understand human technology. They avoid trail cameras with remarkable consistency. They stay out of clear lines of sight. They seem to understand when they're being observed or tracked. This isn't animal cunning. This is intelligence comparable to, or possibly exceeding human intelligence, deployed specifically to remain hidden. One wildlife biologist conducting field research observed behavior that stunned him. He was watching a clear-cut area through binoculars, observing a massive figure crossing approximately 200 yards away. The figure stood well over 7 feet tall and moved with a distinctive gait. He had a clear view for several seconds. He blinked, adjusted his grip on the binoculars, and when he looked again, the figure had vanished. The clear cut stretched for a quarter mile in every direction, with nowhere to hide. Whatever he'd been watching had disappeared from open ground in the span of a second. The sensation of being watched is almost universal in encounter reports. Not the vague unease of being in dark woods, but an overwhelming, focused awareness that something intelligent is observing. People describe it as feeling eyes on them, a physical sensation that makes neck hair stand up and triggers every primitive warning system humans possess. But when they turn to look, there's nothing visible, just that persistent sense of being studied by something hidden, something patient, something that chooses when and whether to reveal itself. Multiple hunters report experiencing what they describe as time distortions during encounters. A hunter tracking a deer saw a large figure ahead and froze, trying to decide whether to retreat or investigate. From his perspective, he stood there for perhaps 10 seconds before backing away, slowly. But when he checked his watch later, he'd lost 45 minutes. He has no memory of that time, no sense of anything unusual happening, just a gap where time should have been. Other hunters report similar experiences, losing anywhere from minutes to hours with no recollection of what occurred. During the filming of one documentary, the videographer and sound technician, experienced professionals who'd worked countless shoots, were absolutely stunned when 3 cameras went down simultaneously and 3 different lavalier microphones failed at the same time. They said that they've heard about this, but they can't believe they experienced it. It goes toward the evidence that in areas where Bigfoot is present, electronics behave impossibly. In one interview captured in the film, a paramedic described encountering a Bigfoot that crossed in front of their emergency vehicle, and everything in their rig shut down, every piece of electronic equipment going dark simultaneously. These people are credible professionals reporting something that defies conventional understanding. Over time, Paulides finally started listening to Native American accounts, and a very different picture emerged. Tribal elders don't speak of these beings as animals. They describe them as people, another tribe that lives according to different rules. The indigenous languages have specific names for them, not the generic Bigfoot coined by modern society, but terms that translate more closely to old people, or forest people, or the tall ones. Without the advancements of cameras, traditions passed down through generations, the knowledge that these beings have language, culture, social structures, and laws. They live in family groups, care for their young, and maintain territories. Some tribal accounts describe them as the original inhabitants, the first people who lived on the land before modern humans arrived. Other traditions say they came from the stars, descending to Earth in ancient times and choosing to live in deep forests away from human civilization. The descriptions consistently emphasize human-like qualities rather than animal characteristics. They're intelligent and aware, capable of choosing when and how to interact with people. Some tribes describe them as generally peaceful but protective of their territories, avoiding humans when possible but capable of asserting themselves when necessary. The protocols for encountering them involve respect and appropriate behavior, treating them as one would treat people from another culture, not as wild animals to be feared or hunted. Historical records support these accounts. Journals and letters from settlers in the 1800s include references to indigenous people speaking of hairy giants in the mountains. One particularly detailed account from a rancher in Northern California describes Native Americans bringing food to a creature living in nearby cliffs, treating it with respect and care. The rancher asked elders about it and was told the creature was a kind of person, different from them, but deserving of consideration and protection. These tribal perspectives align with evidence that modern investigators find puzzling. If the creatures possess language, if they demonstrate intelligence and cultural behaviors, if they're capable of complex decision-making and social organization, then treating them as undiscovered apes fundamentally misunderstands what they are. The indigenous communities have been saying this for centuries. Perhaps it's time researchers started taking that knowledge seriously. Over the years, Freedom of Information requests and interviews with former government personnel have revealed something disturbing. Official agencies, from the National Park Service to the Forest Service to military installations, have documented encounters but never made them public. Reports exist in archives that the general public doesn't access. Rangers have been told to redirect questions about unusual sightings. Military personnel stationed in remote areas have been debriefed about encounters and instructed not to discuss them. One document Paulides obtained through persistent requests describes an incident at a secure facility in the Pacific Northwest. Multiple personnel reported seeing a large bipedal figure moving along the perimeter fence. Security footage captured something, but was classified and removed from standard records. The official explanation was that nothing unusual occurred, but employees who were present insist otherwise, describing a creature that stood at least 8 feet tall and moved with obvious intelligence, studying the facility's layout as if assessing defenses. Why would government agencies suppress or downplay these encounters? Several theories exist. Perhaps they genuinely don't know what the creatures are and don't want to create public panic about an unexplained phenomenon. Maybe they're concerned about the impact on public lands if people became afraid to visit national parks and forests. Or possibly they know more than they're admitting, and disclosure would raise questions about why information has been withheld for decades. Former personnel occasionally speak out after retirement, describing encounters during their service and the official responses. The pattern is consistent. Acknowledge the event internally, document it, and then minimize or deny it in any public forum. This isn't conspiracy theory speculation. These are documented cases with paper trails and multiple witnesses. Something is being observed in government-controlled areas, and the official position remains that nothing unusual is happening. The disconnect between private knowledge and public statements raises obvious questions. Jonathan Dover, a Navajo ranger, provided perhaps the most credible insider perspective according to Paulides. During his time with the Rangers, his primary job at some point became investigating Bigfoot and UFOs. He came across as such a credible individual that it's hard not to believe everything he says. He even worked at Skinwalker Ranch, where he brought drummers with him during one investigation. They were watching boulders at a distance, and those drums heated up the boulders in a way that made no rational sense. It was a turning point that made researchers think that maybe sound, maybe rhythm, maybe there's something to all this that needed further investigation. Among the most perplexing patterns in encounter reports are descriptions of unusual lights. Witnesses describe seeing orbs or spheres of light in areas where encounters occur, sometimes before seeing a creature, sometimes during an encounter, sometimes after. These aren't distant lights that could be explained as aircraft or astronomical objects. They're described as glowing spheres at ground level or floating through trees, moving in ways that seem purposeful and controlled. Paulides noted that one researcher captured video footage showing a brief flash of reddish light that coincided exactly with a deep grunting vocalization. The light appeared and disappeared in a fraction of a second, but frame-by-frame analysis showed it corresponded precisely with the sound. Every attempt to explain it as lens flare or passing insects failed. The color, intensity, and timing didn't match any conventional explanation. It remained a mystery, one more piece of evidence that didn't fit expected patterns. Other reports describe larger light phenomena. Witnesses talk about shimmering areas that look like heat distortion or the visual effect when looking through water. These distortions appear in forest clearings or along tree lines, with figures sometimes visible within or emerging from them. Some witnesses describe the distortions as looking like doorways or windows, rectangular areas where the air itself seems different. Creatures are reported stepping through these areas and vanishing, or appearing from them as if entering from somewhere else. At locations known for unusual activity, certain areas of Native American reservations or specific wilderness regions, witnesses report seeing both creatures and light phenomena occurring together. Videos exist showing thermal signatures of large bipedal figures in proximity to unexplained light sources. Are these separate mysteries happening in the same locations by coincidence? Or is there an actual connection? Could these creatures somehow be associated with, or even traveling through, the light phenomena that witnesses describe? After years of accumulating evidence, after thousands of interviews and countless hours analyzing reports, Paulides identified a pattern that traditional researchers had been ignoring. In a significant number of encounters, witnesses describe seeing creatures appear or disappear in ways that suggest they're not simply moving through normal space. They seem to be stepping into or out of areas where the air looks different, where reality itself appears distorted. One account from a rancher describes watching through binoculars as a large figure walked toward a shimmering area in a meadow. The shimmer looked like heat distortion, but the day was cool and overcast. The figure appeared to pause at the edge of this distortion, then stepped into it and vanished. Not walked behind something, not moved out of sight, but disappeared as if stepping through a doorway into somewhere else. The rancher watched the area for another 20 minutes. The shimmer remained visible for a few minutes and then faded away. This theory explains several persistent mysteries. How do creatures weighing hundreds of pounds move through forests without leaving tracks? They don't always move through normal space. Why do footprint trails begin and end impossibly? Because the creatures aren't walking the entire distance. How do they disappear from open terrain where there's nowhere to hide? They're not hiding. They're leaving through means that don't involve normal movement. One of the most consistently reported and most troubling patterns involves footprints that begin or end impossibly. A couple hiking in national parkland discovered a set of massive tracks crossing a snow-covered meadow. The prints were clear and deep, showing the weight of whatever made them. They followed the trail, photographing the tracks, measuring the stride length. The prints continued across the meadow in a straight line, and then simply stopped. No final print showing a jump or leap. No disturbance suggesting the creature climbed a tree. The tracks just ended in the middle of open snow with no explanation. Rangers in multiple states report similar discoveries. Tracks that appear in the middle of fields or clearings with no trail leading to the first print. Footprints that show up in fresh snow on Forest Service roads, continuing for 50 or 100 yards, and then terminating without explanation. In some cases, the prints end at the base of a tree, but inspection shows no bark disturbance, no scratches or marks suggesting anything climbed up. The tracks simply stop, as if whatever made them ceased to exist at that point. Even more disturbing are reports of tracks that seem to disappear while being followed. A researcher tracking prints through fresh snow described seeing them clearly ahead, following carefully to preserve the evidence. When looking down at the trail already covered, the prints behind were fading, becoming shallower and less distinct, eventually disappearing entirely. Another investigator reported photographing a clear footprint, marking its location, and returning hours later to find the print gone, not filled in by wind or weather, but smoothed over as if it had never existed. However, when discussing the most convincing Bigfoot footage in history, Paulides said that one film still stands above all others: the Patterson Gimlin footage from 1967 at Bluff Creek, California, as cliché as it may sound. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, two old rodeo cowboys, captured something on film that has never been debunked despite decades of scrutiny. The subject moves naturally, with muscle and limb movement inconsistent with human anatomy. The stride length exceeds human norms. The behavior suggests awareness and intelligence. The footage shows what appears to be a female Bigfoot, nicknamed Patty, walking across a creek bed. When she turns to look at the camera, the moment is remarkable. The being is aware she's being filmed. She makes a choice to look, to acknowledge the observers, and then to continue on her way. The musculature visible in the film, the way the muscles move beneath the hair, the proportions of the limbs. Forensic analysis has confirmed these details are consistent with a real creature, not a person in a suit. Paul Freeman's footage from the 1990s shows remarkable similarities. The gleam that comes off the creature in Freeman's film matches the gleam coming off Patty in the Patterson Gimlin footage. Freeman captured something that, if it had emerged today in the age of digital manipulation, would be immediately dismissed. But because it happened before digitalization, there's no way it was faked using modern techniques. The footage even shows a child being picked up by Bigfoot at the end, a detail Freeman didn't even notice at the time. These pieces of film footage, combined with the physical evidence, the DNA results, the witness testimony, and the anomalous phenomena, create a picture that's impossible to ignore. Something is out there, something real. But what the footage really captures isn't just a creature. It's evidence of a phenomenon that exists at the boundaries of current understanding. After nearly 2 decades of investigation, thousands of interviews, analysis of physical evidence from across North America, and careful consideration of reports that seemed impossible, David Paulides reached conclusions on these footages that make many people uncomfortable. Bigfoot is real, not probably real, not possibly real, but definitely real, based on the accumulated weight of evidence. But understanding what Bigfoot actually is requires setting aside simple explanations and confronting a phenomenon that's far stranger than most researchers want to acknowledge. The investigation continues. More footage evidence emerges every year. More witnesses come forward with experiences that follow the same patterns. More researchers take the phenomenon seriously and contribute their expertise to understanding it. Slowly, gradually, the picture becomes clearer. Not clear enough yet for definitive answers, but clear enough to know that something real, something intelligent, something that exists at the edge of human understanding is out there.